He said he hated me. Not quietly. Not in a fit of confusion. He said it like he meant every syllable, and I believed him. Those words have a way of echoing, louder than thunder, softer than regret. You hear them once, but they live inside you for years. That was the night my son, Daniel, stopped being my boy and became my judge. It was raining, one of those quiet, bitter rains that make everything feel heavier than it already is. I just pulled up outside the old house. The one his mother and I once built with dreams instead of money. The lights inside were still on, glowing faintly through the curtains like tired eyes that hadn't slept. I hadn't seen Daniel in 3 months. He was 17 then, tall, stubborn, full of words he didn't understand yet, but felt too deeply to hold back. When I stepped onto that porch, the smell of wet wood and memory hit me all at once. The door opened before I could even knock. He stood there, taller now, shoulders squared, his mother's eyes staring out of my face with all her pain. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His voice cracked halfway through, like it wasn't sure if it wanted to be angry or broken. "I came to see you," I said softly. He shook his head. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to just come back." Inside, I could see his mother, my ex-wife, Laura, sitting on the couch, arms folded, pretending to watch TV. She didn't look at me, but I could tell she was listening. She always did. "I didn't come to fight," I said. Then why did you leave?" His voice rose. "You left her. You left us." There it was. The question that lived in his throat since the day I walked out. See, people think divorces break cleanly, like glass. But they don't. They splinter, leaving invisible shards that cut you every time you try to move on. I didn't leave because I stopped loving his mother. I left because I was drowning in the silence between us. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't throw things, doesn't cry, it just grows, like mold, until it covers every inch of what you once called home. But how do you explain that to a 17-year-old boy who only sees the empty chair at the dinner table? You can't. So I took the blame, and I watched him grow up hating me for something I never wanted to do. That night he stepped out onto the porch, and the rain started falling harder. He didn't care. Neither did I. "I saw Mom crying again," he said. "You know what she said. That you were tired of her. That you found someone else." I felt my jaw tighten. There was someone else. But not in the way he thought. Her name was work. Her name was exhaustion. Her name was the man I became when I forgot how to talk. But he wouldn't believe that.
"Not yet. Daniel."
I started. "There are things." "I don't want to hear it!" he shouted, stepping back. And then, like he'd rehearsed it for years, he said it.
"I hate you."
Just like that. No tears. No hesitation. I wanted to tell him that hate was just love that got lost in translation. But instead, I nodded. Because sometimes, when your child is angry, the kindest thing you can do is let them be. I drove away that night knowing I'd become a villain in his story. And maybe I deserved it. But deep down, I also knew something else. One day, life would hand him his own silence. One day, he'd feel the weight of words left unsaid. And maybe then, he'd understand. That day came 15 years later. But before we get there, you need to know how far a father's heart can stretch before it breaks. Because love doesn't end when you walk away. Sometimes, it just waits for the right moment to be seen again. Before my son hated me, before the divorce papers, before the house became just her house, we were a family that laughed over burnt toast and argued over nothing. We weren't perfect, but for a while, it felt like we were enough. Laura and I met when we were both too young to understand what forever meant. She was sunshine in a denim jacket, always humming songs from the radio, always late to everything. I was quieter, the kind of man who fixed what was broken instead of talking about it. We built a life with more dreams than money, but somehow it worked. Our home smelled like coffee and paint. She was an art teacher, and I was a mechanic. Oil and color, noise and calm. Opposites that balanced, until they didn't. Daniel was born 2 years into our marriage. I still remember the first time I held him. This tiny bundle of warmth, his fingers gripping my thumb like he already knew who I was. I promised him I'd always be there. And I meant it. Every word. Life back then was simple, loud, messy, beautiful. Daniel would run around the living room in his Spider-Man pajamas, pretending to save his mom from invisible monsters. She'd laugh, tell him he was her little hero. And I'd sit back with my coffee, thinking this is what happiness looks like. But the thing about happiness is, it doesn't announce when it's leaving. It just fades, quietly, until you can't remember the last time you heard someone laugh for real. It started small. Laura stopped waiting up for me when I worked late. I stopped asking why she spent more time at school events than at home. We started talking about bills more than dreams. And Daniel, he noticed. Children always do. One night I came home late, another long shift. Another day trying to keep up with rising rent, car payments, and the endless grind that never let a man rest. I found Laura sitting at the kitchen table, a cold plate of dinner waiting. Her eyes looked tired. "Do you even like it here anymore?" she asked softly. I laughed nervously. "Like what? This house?" "No," she said. "With us." That hit harder than she knew, because I didn't have an answer. When love starts dying, it doesn't scream, it whispers. Through half-finished conversations, quiet dinners, and polite smiles, and that whisper had been in our house for months. I tried to fix it, the way I fixed engines, by tightening bolts and replacing parts. But hearts don't work like cars. You can't repair what someone doesn't want to open anymore. Laura wanted warmth. I gave her routine. She wanted conversation. I gave her tired silence. She wanted to feel chosen again. And I, foolishly, thought showing up every day was enough. It wasn't. Daniel was 12 when he started asking questions. "Dad, why do you and Mom never laugh anymore?" I'd smile, ruffle his hair, and say, "Grown-ups just get tired sometimes, buddy." But he'd stare at me, too wise for his age, and whisper, "You don't look tired. You look sad." He was right. There's a kind of sadness you can't hide from your own child. They can see it in your silence, hear it in your breathing. And that's what scared me most, that he was watching us crumble and learning that love ends quietly. The last family photo we ever took was at the county fair. Daniel was grinning with cotton candy in his hands, Laura standing beside me with her arm barely touching mine. When I look at that picture now, I see it. The distance, the effort, the pretending. I think Daniel saw it too, but back then he still believed every family was supposed to look happy in pictures. That night, after he went to bed, Laura and I sat in the living room without a word. The TV played some late-night sitcom, but neither of us laughed. Finally, she said, "Maybe we're both just holding on because of him?" I didn't answer. Because she was right. That was the moment the walls began to close in. I wanted to fight for us, but love can't be fought for alone. And the cruelest truth about marriage is that sometimes two good people just lose each other without meaning to. Still, every night, before Daniel went to bed, I told him, "I love you, son." And he'd always smile and say it back. Back then, I didn't know how much those words would come to mean, or how one day he'd stop saying them altogether. Children don't need to be told when something's wrong. They feel it, in the silence at breakfast, in the way laughter stops too soon, in the spaces between footsteps that used to move in rhythm. Daniel felt it before either of us admitted it out loud. He started sitting between us on the couch when we watched TV, like he was trying to bridge a gap only he could see. He'd grab my hand and his mother's, pressing them together. "See?" He'd grin. "Now you're holding hands again." I used to laugh at his innocence. Laura would smile softly, play along for his sake. But the warmth never stayed. We were actors in a play neither of us wanted to perform anymore. One Saturday, I promised Daniel I'd take him fishing, something we hadn't done in a long time. He was thrilled. Packed his little tackle box the night before. Told his mom he'd bring home a record-breaking catfish. But that morning, the shop called. One of my guys didn't show up, and the owner needed me to cover. I stood in the kitchen, coffee growing cold in my hand, watching Daniel buzz with excitement as he laced his sneakers. When I told him we had to postpone, his face fell. Again, he whispered. I tried to explain, "Buddy, it's just work." But he cut me off, voice trembling. "You always say that." He wasn't wrong. Next time, I'd promised him had built a wall between us, one excuse at a time. That evening, when I came home, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, his fishing hat still on. His mother was cleaning dishes, quiet. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Hey, champ," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "We'll go next weekend, okay?" He shrugged. "Don't bother. Mom said she'll take me instead." It was such a small thing, one skipped trip. But in a child's heart, it's never small. It's proof. Proof that maybe you've stopped choosing them. Laura and I started arguing more after that. Not loud fights, the kind where neighbors listen and lights turn on. Ours were quiet ones. Sharp words whispered behind closed doors. "You never have time for him," she'd say. Or for me. "I'm doing this for us," I'd reply. Her eyes would harden. "If this is what for us looks like, maybe you should stop." And Daniel would hear every word, even when we thought he didn't. One night, he came into my room holding a drawing he'd made at school. It was a picture of the three of us, me, him, and Laura. But I was drawn in gray. He and his mom were in color. "Why am I gray?" I asked. He looked down. "Because you're never here." That one hit deeper than any argument I'd ever had with his mother. Because children don't lie. They just tell the truth too early. I tried to make up for it. Started coming home early, sitting with him while he did homework, taking him for ice cream on Sundays. For a while, it worked. He laughed again. We watched movies together, even fell asleep on the couch once, his head on my chest like when he was little. But happiness was fragile back then, easily cracked by even the softest pressure. Laura began spending more evenings, grading papers, late. Her phone buzzed more often. She smiled at messages she didn't share, I noticed. Of course I did. But when love is dying, denial becomes your best friend. You tell yourself stories that make the silence easier to live with. She's just tired. She needs space. She still loves me. One Friday night, I came home early again. A small surprise. I wanted to cook dinner, something nice, maybe rekindle what we'd lost. But when I walked into the kitchen, there were 2 wine glasses in the sink, and one of them had lipstick. Laura looked startled when she saw me. "Oh, you're home early," she said. There was something in her tone. Not guilt exactly. Just distance. Like she'd already said goodbye, only I hadn't heard it yet. Daniel came running in from his room.
"Dad!"
"You're home." He wrapped his arms around my waist. Laura smiled faintly. "He's been waiting for you all evening." It was true. I could feel the warmth in his hug, the way he clung a second too long. Maybe he already knew he'd need that memory later, when everything fell apart. That night I stood by his door long after he fell asleep. I watched him breathe, peaceful, unaware of the storm coming for him. I wanted to protect him from what was about to happen. But how do you protect your child from heartbreak that hasn't happened yet? You can't. You just hope love will be strong enough to survive what's coming. And deep down, I think I already knew. Ours wouldn't. It was a Thursday, one of those evenings where the world feels quiet, but your heart refuses to be. I remember the smell of rain outside, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the faint sound of the TV in Daniel's room. Laura was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a glass of wine in her hand. I'd been noticing it for weeks. The way she smiled at her screen more than at me, the way she guarded her phone like it held the last piece of her heart. I told myself I was imagining it, but love, when wounded, has sharp instincts. It knows when something's slipping away. That night I walked over and sat beside her. "Can we talk?" I asked quietly. She didn't look up. "About what?" "About us," I said. "About how distant we've become." She sighed, her thumb still moving across her phone. "Not this again, please." "Laura," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I'm not trying to fight. I just want to fix whatever's breaking." And that's when she said it. "Maybe it's already broken." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I didn't know, but because hearing them out loud made it real. I remember staring at her, trying to find the woman I fell in love with somewhere behind those tired eyes. But all I saw was distance, resentment, and maybe even relief, like she'd been waiting for me to finally stop pretending. "Is there someone else?" I asked. Her silence was louder than a confession. "Laura," my voice cracked. "Is there someone else?" She finally met my eyes. Does it matter? It did. God, it did. But in that moment, I realized the truth wouldn't save us. It would only finish what time had already started. Daniel walked in just as I was about to leave the room. He froze, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" he asked. "Nothing, buddy," I said quickly. "Just grown-up stuff." He looked between us, his mother's wet eyes, my clenched fists, and frowned. "Why are you mad at Mom again?" "I'm not mad," I said, forcing a smile. "We're just talking." But he didn't buy it. Kids never do. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I went downstairs for a glass of water. Her phone was still on the counter, unlocked. I wish I could say I didn't look. But I did, and in one swipe my world ended. Messages. Words too soft for strangers, too familiar for friends. Pictures, plans. It wasn't just betrayal. It was confirmation of every fear I'd been swallowing for months. I put the phone down gently, like it might explode if I didn't. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from grief. Because at that moment I wasn't thinking about her. I was thinking about Daniel. How was I going to explain to him that the home he loved wasn't real anymore? The next morning, I sat in my truck outside the house for almost an hour, staring at the steering wheel. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. Every brick, every curtain, every sound inside that home had turned into a ghost of what used to be. Finally, I forced myself in. Daniel was at the table, eating cereal. "Morning, Dad," he said with a smile that felt like sunlight after a storm. I smiled back, pretending. "Morning, champ." He looked around. "Where's Mom?" I swallowed. Sleeping in. But she wasn't. Her car was already gone. And that morning I realized she hadn't just left early. She'd left us. A week later, she told me she wanted space. "Time apart," she said. "Time for what?" I asked. "To think." But I knew she wasn't coming back. When I told Daniel, he didn't say a word. He just looked at me with tears pooling in his eyes and whispered, "Did you make her leave?" That one sentence cut deeper than anything Laura had ever said. I tried to explain, but to a 12-year-old boy, explanations sound like excuses. He turned away, shaking his head. "I hate you." Then he ran upstairs, slammed his door, and for the first time in my life, I realized losing your child's love hurts worse than losing your marriage. That night, I sat outside on the porch, staring into the dark. The rain had started again, gentle but cold. I could hear Daniel crying through his window. I wanted to go to him, to hold him, to tell him everything would be okay. But how do you comfort someone when you're the reason they're hurting? I stayed there until the rain soaked through my shirt, and the only thing I could whisper was, "I'm sorry. Son, I'm so sorry." When the papers came, they didn't look like the end of a marriage. They looked like the end of a life. 15 years of latter fights, birthdays, late-night talks, reduced to a few typed pages and signatures. Laura signed first. Her signature was neat, confident, final. Mine trembled. Not because I didn't want to let her go, but because I didn't know how to. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much. Cracked tiles, flickering light in the hallway, a view of a parking lot instead of a yard, but it was quiet. Too quiet. Every night, I'd come home from work and cook for one. I'd still set 2 plates out by accident sometimes. Old habits don't die. They fade, like photographs left in sunlight. Daniel stayed with his mother, of course. The court called it primary custody. I called it losing my son. At first, I tried to visit him every weekend. I'd bring his favorite snacks, tickets to a game, new books. He'd open the door, stiff and polite. "Hey, Dad." That was all I got. He'd sit across from me at the table, arms crossed, eyes glued to his phone. I'd ask about school, his friends, what he wanted to do over summer break. He'd answer with one word. "Nothing." Whatever. Laura would walk in sometimes, pretending to tidy up but really just supervising. Her silence said everything. That I was a guest now, not family. When I'd leave, Daniel would barely look up. "See you next week," I'd say. "Yeah." He'd mumble without meaning it. A few months later, he stopped answering my calls. Then the visits became less frequent. Sometimes he was busy, sometimes a friend's house. And one day Laura texted me, "Daniel doesn't want to see you right now. Please respect that." I stared at the message for a long time. My own son didn't want to see me. The boy who once ran into my arms after school, who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms, now saw me as the villain in his story. The thing about being a father is, you don't stop being one just because they stop calling you Dad. You still wake up wondering if they ate breakfast. You still check the weather to see if they need a jacket. You still drive past their school, hoping for a glimpse, even if they don't know you're there. I used to park near the corner just to see him walk out after class. He looked so much taller, so much older, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes glued to his phone. I'd want to roll down the window and call his name. But I never did, because I was afraid he'd turn around and look at me with hate. Holidays were the hardest. Christmas felt like an empty room. I'd buy gifts, not fancy ones, just things that reminded me of him. A baseball glove, a watch, a sketchbook. They'd stay wrapped for months, untouched. Sometimes I'd write letters, not emails, real letters, on paper, with ink stains and crossed out words. I never sent them. They were my way of talking to him when the world wouldn't let me. Letters like, "Son, I know you don't understand now, but one day you will. I didn't leave you. I left a marriage that was already gone. I hope you still remember how much I love you." I kept them all in a shoebox, under my bed, like secrets no one would ever care to read. Years passed like that, one quiet, lonely season after another. I'd hear about him through mutual friends, social media, whispers. Daniel's in college now. Daniel got a job. Daniel's dating someone. Every time I saw a new photo of him online, smiling, growing, living, I felt both pride and ache. Pride because he was doing well. Ache because I wasn't part of that story anymore. One night years later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. But something, maybe that father's instinct that never dies, told me to answer. Hello. There was silence, then a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Dad." My heart stopped. "Daniel?" He cleared his throat. "Yeah, it's me." I sat down, gripping the edge of the table. "Son, is everything okay?" He hesitated. "Can I come over?" My eyes burned before I even knew why. "Of course," I said softly. "Of course you can." When I opened the door 30 minutes later, there he was, taller, broader, a grown man now. But in his eyes, I still saw the little boy who once called me a hero. He didn't smile. He just stood there looking nervous, lost. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I whispered back. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, without another word, he stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't long, but it was real. And it was enough to break me. He didn't say much that night. We just sat at my small kitchen table, 2 cups of untouched coffee between us, the hum of the old refrigerator, filling the silence we didn't know how to break. He looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally. His hair was messy, dark circles beneath his eyes, and his wedding ring, I noticed, was still there, but he kept twisting it nervously. It was the first time I'd seen him in almost 8 years. "Some," I finally said, keeping my tone gentle. "What brings you here?" "Son." He stared at the cup for a long moment before answering. "Things aren't good, Dad." I nodded slowly. "With work." Or, he looked up, and that's when I saw it. The same exhaustion, the same frustration, the same look I once saw in the mirror before I left his mother. "With Emily," he said quietly. "We fight all the time. She says I don't listen. I say she doesn't understand how hard I'm trying." I didn't interrupt. I just let him talk. "She says I'm becoming cold, like I don't care anymore. But I do. God, I do. It's just—" He paused, rubbing his face. "It's like no matter what I say, I'm wrong." There it was, history echoing itself. Different names, same pain. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that I had lived through that same storm once, standing in the same kind of silence, watching love slip away while pretending it wasn't happening. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I asked softly, "Does she know you came here?" He shook his head. "No, we had a fight, and I just left. I started driving, and before I knew it, I was in front of your building." A small, sad smile crossed his face. I didn't even know I remembered the address. I smiled too, faintly. "I'm glad you did." He leaned back in his chair, sighing. "You probably think I'm just like Mom, huh? Blaming someone else for my own problems." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I think you're human. And being human means sometimes you lose your way." He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in years, there wasn't hate in his eyes. Just confusion. And pain. "Dad," he said suddenly, "when you left Mom, did you ever think about staying?" That question froze me. I took a deep breath, feeling the old wound reopen. "Every day," I said quietly. "I thought about it every single day." "Then why didn't you?" I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly. "Because staying would have meant lying, and love can't survive in a lie." He didn't say anything. Just nodded slowly, as if a part of him didn't want to understand, but another part couldn't help but see the truth in it. We talked for hours that night, about marriage, about anger, about silence, that dangerous quiet that creeps in when 2 people stop listening to each other. He told me things he'd never said before. How he sometimes came home and sat in the car, just to avoid walking into another argument. How he still loved Emily, but didn't know how to reach her anymore. How he was afraid of becoming the man who left, like me. That last part broke me, because I saw it now, how deeply my choices had carved into him. How much of his fear came from my shadow. Before he left that night, I stopped him at the door. "Daniel," I said softly, "whatever happens between you and Emily, don't make decisions out of pride. That's what ruins men." He nodded, eyes glassy. "I'm trying not to, Dad. I really am." Then he hesitated, as if something else was on his mind. "Dad." "Yes, son? I'm sorry. For how I treated you all those years." I didn't know what to say. I dreamed of hearing those words, but when they finally came, they didn't feel like victory. They felt like forgiveness, gentle, fragile, and long overdue. I stepped forward and put my hand on his shoulder. "There's nothing to forgive," I said. "You were just a boy protecting your mother, and I was a man who didn't know how to explain his pain." He nodded slowly, and for the first time in a long time, we hugged, not out of obligation, but out of love. When the door closed behind him, I stood there for a while. The apartment felt warm for once, alive. It had been years since I felt like someone needed me. But that night, I realized, fathers never stop being fathers, even when the world tells them they're not. A few weeks passed before I heard from Daniel again. At first, it was just short calls. "How are you, Dad?" "Just checking in." Sometimes he'd drop by after work, bringing takeout or a six-pack, saying he needed a break from the noise. I didn't ask too many questions. When someone's heart is cracking, silence is kinder than advice. But one evening, he showed up with his wedding ring in his hand, just held it there, turning it over and over, like a coin that had lost its value. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse, "she told me she's leaving." I didn't rush to speak. I just motioned for him to sit down. He did, staring at nothing, eyes dull, shoulders heavy. "She said she can't do this anymore, that I've changed." He gave a dry laugh. "She's right. I have changed. I work 12 hours a day just to keep us afloat, and somehow that makes me the bad guy." He rubbed his forehead. "Dad, I tried. I swear I tried. But no matter what I do, it's not enough." There was anger in his voice, but beneath it, I heard the same heartbreak that once lived in mine. It was like looking into a mirror 20 years younger. "You know," I said quietly, "when your mother and I started falling apart, I thought working harder would fix it too. I thought if I kept the lights on, if I kept the bills paid, she'd feel loved." I paused, remembering. "But love doesn't live in paychecks, son. It lives in presence." Daniel's eyes flickered. "So you're saying this is my fault?" "No," I said gently. "I'm saying you can't fix someone's loneliness with effort. You have to see them, and they have to see you back." He leaned back, silent. Then, after a long pause, he muttered, "Emily doesn't see me anymore." He stayed over that night. I gave him my bed and took the couch, just like when he was little and got sick, and I'd sleep on the floor beside him. But this time the sickness wasn't in his body. It was in his heart. Around 2 a.m. I heard him crying quietly, not sobbing, just soft, broken sounds that only a father can recognize, the kind that come from deep regret. I thought about going in, but I remembered what it felt like to cry alone and decided to let him have that space. Sometimes pain needs silence to finish its sentence. The next morning, I made coffee and eggs, the way I used to when he was a boy. He came out wearing yesterday's shirt, eyes red, voice low. "Thanks," he mumbled, sitting down. We ate quietly for a while. Then he looked up and said, "I think I finally understand you." I set down my fork. "What do you mean?" He gave a small, bitter laugh. "All those years I blamed you for leaving Mom. I told myself you were selfish, cold. But now I get it." He swallowed hard. "When someone stops loving you, no matter how much you give, staying feels like dying slowly." Those words hit me like a wave I'd been waiting for all my life. I reached across the table, placed my hand over his. "Daniel, I never wanted you to understand me this way. Not like this." He nodded. "I know, but I had to learn it myself." For a long while, we just sat there, two men bound by the same wound, realizing love isn't something you hold on to by force. A few days later, he moved out of his house. He said he needed time to think, the same phrase his mother once used. When I visited his new apartment, I saw boxes stacked everywhere. His life disassembled, waiting to be sorted. He laughed softly. Guess it runs in the family, huh? The men who walk away. I frowned. We don't walk away, son. We just stop pretending we're happy. He nodded slowly, then looked around. You think there's a way back from this? I thought of Laura, of the years gone, of the distance that never healed. Maybe, I said honestly, if both hearts still want to find each other. He sighed. I don't think hers does. And for the first time, he didn't cry. He just accepted it. The same quiet acceptance that had once nearly destroyed me. That night, after he left, I sat alone on the balcony, the same way I used to after my divorce. But this time, it wasn't my pain I carried. It was his. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years wishing my son would understand me. Now that he did, I wished he never had to. It was a gray Sunday afternoon, the kind where even the sunlight looks tired. I was sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the rain drizzle over the street. That's when my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. But something about the area code, Daniel's city. I answered. Hello. There was a long pause on the other end. Then a quiet, trembling voice said, Mr. Porter. It took me a moment to place it. Emily.
Yes,
she whispered. I hope it's okay that I called. I sat up, heart tightening.
of course.
Is Daniel all right? He's fine, she said quickly. At least, I think he is. He moved out 2 weeks ago, and he won't answer my calls. Her voice cracked on that last part, and I could hear it. The same panic I once heard in Laura's voice years ago. The fear of losing someone you still love but don't know how to reach anymore. We stayed quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, I don't know why I'm calling you. I just didn't know who else to talk to. You did the right thing, I said gently. What's going on, Emily? She took a deep breath, her voice shaky but honest. I think I pushed him too far. I wanted him to open up, to tell me what he was feeling, but every time I tried, it turned into an argument. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I know that story well. I didn't want him to think I was like his mother. She added quickly, but sometimes I'd see that look in his eyes, like he wasn't really there anymore, like he'd already left. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I could feel my past replaying itself through hers. Different people, same mistake, two hearts growing further apart, both blaming the other for the distance. Emily, I said quietly, when Daniel was a little boy, he used to think love meant always saying yes. But love isn't about agreement. It's about honesty. Even when it hurts. She was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, Do you think he still loves me? I took a deep breath. Love doesn't disappear overnight, but it does get buried under pain if you don't clear the space for it to breathe. She sniffed softly on the other end. I just wish I knew how to reach him. I thought for a moment, then said, Tell him the truth. Not the polite truth, not the I'm fine truth. The kind that scares you to say out loud. That's the one he'll listen to. She didn't respond right away, but I could tell she was crying quietly. Thank you, Mr. Porter, she said finally, for not hating me. Hate, I said softly. I've hated enough things in my life, Emily. You're not one of them. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the rain. It felt strange. Talking to the woman my son loved, the woman who was hurting him and hurting because of him at the same time. I realized then how fragile love really is. Not a battle of right and wrong, but a dance between two people trying not to step on each other's hearts. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Daniel, about Emily, about Laura. About all the times I could have said one honest thing and didn't. Around midnight, I picked up the phone and typed a message to Daniel. Son, if someone reaches out from a place of pain, listen. Not to respond, but to understand. I didn't know if he'd read it, but I sent it anyway. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. Emily called me last night. I didn't want to answer. But I did. We're going to meet and talk. That's all it said. No promises, no declarations. Just a chance. And sometimes that's all love really needs. Later that evening, Daniel stopped by my apartment again. He looked calmer this time, almost peaceful. She told me she talked to you. He said with a faint smile. I nodded. She needed someone to listen. He exhaled deeply. I think we both did. Then he sat down across from me, his tone softer than I'd heard in years. "Dad, how did you forgive Mom?" I looked at him carefully, knowing how much weight that question carried. "I stopped waiting for her to be sorry," I said, "and started forgiving myself first." He nodded slowly, the words sinking in. "I think I'm ready to do that too." For the first time in a long while, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Hope. And I realized this was the moment I'd been waiting for. Not to be right, not to be redeemed, but to see my son finally understand the difference between leaving out of anger and walking away out of love. It was a quiet morning when Daniel came over again. No warning, no call, just the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. I stepped outside and saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, eyes heavy but calm. He looked older, not by years, but by experience. He gave me a faint smile. "Hey, Dad." That simple word, Dad, hit me harder than I expected. It had been a long time since he said it without anger behind it. "Morning, son," I said. "You look like you've had a long night." He chuckled softly. "You could say that." Emily and I talked until sunrise. I gestured for him to sit down beside me on the porch. He sat, quiet for a moment, just watching the light break through the trees. Then he said, "I think I finally understand you." Those words, I didn't know whether to breathe or cry. He looked straight ahead as he spoke. "When I was a kid, I thought you left Mom because you stopped loving her. Because you gave up on us." He paused, his voice catching. "But last night, when Emily was crying, begging me to talk to her, I realized I was doing the same thing to her that Mom did to you. Pushing her away, thinking silence would fix things." He rubbed his face, exhausted. "I wanted to walk out, Dad. I really did. But then I saw her sitting there, broken, scared, and I remembered something you said. Love isn't about agreement. It's about honesty, even when it hurts." He turned to look at me. So I stayed. We talked. We were honest, for the first time in months. I felt my throat tighten. "What did you tell her?" "Everything," he said quietly. "That I was scared of turning into you, and scared of losing her the same way you lost Mom." He exhaled, tears forming in his eyes. "I told her I judged you for leaving, but now I see. Sometimes leaving isn't about escape. It's about survival." I nodded slowly. It was strange hearing my own story told back to me through my son's voice, but it was also healing in a way words can't explain. He continued softer now. "Emily said she forgives me. We're not fixed, but we're trying again." I smiled. "That's all that matters. Trying." He laughed quietly. "Yeah, you were right, you know. Marriage isn't about being perfect. It's about staying through the mess." Then he looked at me, eyes glistening. "Dad, I'm sorry. For hating you. For not even trying to understand your side." I shook my head. "You don't need to apologize, son. You were protecting your mother. That's what good sons do." He wiped his eyes and whispered, "I just wish I'd seen sooner that you were protecting yourself, too." We sat there for a while, neither of us saying much. It wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that finally feels safe. Then Daniel stood up and said, "You know what the hardest part of growing up is?" "What's that?" I asked. "Realizing your parents were just people, doing the best they could with what they had." I smiled. "And sometimes, that's the only kind of love we can give." He nodded. Then, almost shyly, he added, "Emily's pregnant, Dad." For a moment, the world stopped. I stared at him, my heart thudding. He smiled nervously. "I was going to tell you earlier, but I wasn't ready. We weren't ready." A tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. "Son, that's incredible." He laughed. "Yeah, it's terrifying, too." I chuckled, wiping my eyes. "Good. That means you'll be a great father." He looked at me, eyes soft with emotion. "Do you think I'll be like you?" I smiled faintly. "I hope you'll be better." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind those words. Then he said, "I think I finally get what you were trying to do all those years ago. You didn't leave because you stopped loving us. You left because staying would have destroyed you. And maybe us too." I couldn't speak. Hearing my son, the same boy who once shouted, "I hate you for leaving Mom," now speak with such clarity and compassion, it was like watching a wound finally close. We sat there until the sun dipped low, the air filled with quiet acceptance. Before he left, Daniel turned to me and said, "I want my kid to know his grandfather. Not the man I thought you were, but the man you really are. I swallowed hard and nodded. I'd like that, too. He smiled, not as a son talking to his father, but as a man talking to another man who finally earned his understanding. As he drove away, I felt something lift from my chest. Years of guilt, shame, and distance dissolving into the evening air. That night I stood by the window, thinking about how life has a way of circling back. How the things we once ran from become the lessons we're destined to teach. My son once hated me for leaving his mother. Now, he understood why I did. Not because I wanted freedom, but because I wanted peace. Dear little one, by the time you read this, I'll probably have more gray hair than I do now, and your father will have a few of his own. Life has a funny way of moving faster than you expect. One day, you're a young man holding your baby for the first time, thinking you'll never make the mistakes your father did. The next, you find yourself praying you won't repeat them. I wanted to write this, not because I have all the answers, but because I spent a lifetime learning what love really means. And sometimes, those lessons were painful. Your father once hated me. He was just a boy when I left his mother. I can't blame him. All he saw was a broken home, a quiet house, a mother's tears. He thought I walked away from love. But the truth is, I left because I couldn't be the man your grandmother needed anymore. We loved each other once, deeply. But love without peace turns into poison. I stayed longer than I should have, hoping things would change. Until I realized staying was teaching my son that misery was normal. Leaving wasn't courage, it was survival. I know that doesn't sound noble, and maybe it isn't. But sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is stop pretending you can fix what's already fallen apart. When your father grew up, he carried that anger like a shield. Every time he looked at me, I saw the child who never got an explanation. I tried to reach him. Birthdays, graduations, all those years. But pain can be louder than truth. It wasn't until he became a husband himself that he began to see me differently. One night, he showed up at my house, eyes tired and heart heavy. His marriage was hanging by a thread. That was the night my son became a man. He said, "Dad, I think I finally understand you." Those 7 words undid years of silence between us. I didn't need him to agree with my choices. I only wanted him to see the heart behind them. He told me he'd almost left his wife that night. But instead, he stayed, he talked. He fought for love the right way, with honesty. And for the first time, I realized he'd taken the best part of me forward, even when he thought he'd rejected it. So, little one, when you grow up and life starts teaching you its own lessons, remember this: love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's choosing silence instead of shouting, distance instead of destruction. Sometimes it's letting go so that both of you can breathe again. Your father will make mistakes. You will too. But I hope you'll both remember that love is never measured by perfection, only by effort. If one day you find yourself angry at him, the way he once was with me, I hope you give him time. Time to explain, time to be human, time to be forgiven. Because one day, you'll stand in his shoes, and you'll see how hard it really is to be a good man in a world that often mistakes silence for weakness and patience for surrender. Your grandmother and I, we were 2 people who tried, failed, and still wished each other peace. Your father, he was the bridge between our mistakes and your future, and you are the hope that all that pain wasn't wasted. When you come into this world, I hope you grow up in a home filled with laughter, but also truth. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't hold grudges so long they turn into walls, and never be ashamed of the people who came before you, even if their stories are messy, especially if they're messy, because behind every broken thing in this world, there's usually love, just buried under misunderstanding. One day, when you're old enough to hear stories, your father will tell you about me. He might tell you I was stubborn. He might tell you I left. But I hope he also tells you this, that I loved him more than my pride, and that everything I did, right or wrong, was because I wanted him to find peace where I could not. If you remember nothing else from this letter, remember this: be kind when you don't understand someone's choices. Everyone is fighting battles you can't see, and forgiveness, true forgiveness, is not about forgetting what happened. It's about letting go of the weight it leaves behind. So, little one, live gently, love fiercely, and when the time comes, be the kind of man who listens more than he speaks. That's how your father learned to heal. That's how I finally did too. With love, your grandfather. That night, after writing the letter, I folded it carefully and placed it inside a small wooden box. The same one that once held my wedding ring. I locked it away in the drawer of my old desk, hoping that one day, when my son felt ready, he'd hand it to his boy and say, "This is from your grandfather, the man I once hated, and later learned to forgive." Because in the end, forgiveness isn't about rewriting the past. It's about finding peace in what it taught you. And as I blew out the candle, I finally felt that peace settle over me, quiet, warm, and long overdue. When I look back now, I don't see failure anymore. I see a man who did what he could with the heart he had. Maybe I wasn't the best husband. Maybe I wasn't even the best father. But I loved my son enough to let him hate me, until life taught him what I couldn't. Sometimes, love doesn't look like holding on. Sometimes, it looks like walking away, so the people you love can grow strong enough to understand you later. If you're a parent, you'll know the hardest part isn't the sleepless nights or the growing bills. It's watching your child judge you through eyes that haven't yet lived your pain, and hoping one day they'll see you not as a villain, but as a human being who tried. I let go of my son's anger years ago, but the day he said, "Dad, I understand you now," that was the day I finally forgave myself. So tell me, if you were in my place, would you have left too? Would you have stayed, knowing love had already turned into silence? I'd love to hear what your heart says. Tell me in the comments. And if my story touched you, don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the stories we share are the bridges that heal what words alone cannot.